Hello, everyone. How's it going? How are you today? We are going to be spending our day at the workbench. Doing a little bit of wiring for the model railroad. Wiring is a very important part of the hobby. And it is something that I am constantly trying to avoid and not doing a very good job of it. So what I'm actually doing is I'm preparing my terminal blocks that will feed the feeders that run to my switch machines in my yards. So I'm running everything through terminal blocks, and then from the terminal blocks into my bus lines. So I can kind of reduce. I can reduce the number of feeders I got coming out of my bus lines, just to kind of keep those potential. I don't want potential problems to happen in the bus lines, but rather than happen in the terminals than in the bus, for sure. For sure. Not quite as set up as I want to be. Let me grab some wire real quick. Alrighty. So my plan is to, this is a 10, what do you call it? 10 block terminal. I don't know what it's called. It's got essentially 10 spots here for running wire out of. Well, 20 if you count the other side. So I'm going to split it in half. I'm going to have 5 positive and 5 negative on this block. And yeah, so that'll allow me to kind of get everything kind of together and a little more compact on this. So this should be pretty nice. First thing I'm going to do is, let's see, what do I want to do first here? I think I want to, let's go ahead and get the feeders and everything all wired up. That way I can worry about soldering later. So I did some measurement. This is almost the longest feeder I need. And then they get a little bit shorter after that. Try to measure my feeders out fairly well so that I don't have issues running out of wiring, because wiring is kind of expensive. That was the one sort of surprise with my model railroad, is just the price of wiring. Let me see if I can find my better wire cutters. Actually, these are my better wire cutters. Alrighty. How's it going today? Sorry I will not be providing music for everyone. I got in trouble last time for doing that. I got a, what do you call it? A copyright claim from YouTube. I want to get my smaller needle nose. There we go. Smaller needle nose. Yeah, I got a copyright claim from YouTube on the last one I did, which was not fun. Especially since I was broadcasting a supposedly free music channel. It turns out not to be the case. Oh, stop focusing. Sorry about that. This is my second longest, so I'm gonna have that one. Loosen all these up. If you have questions about wiring, let me know. Let me know in the chat. I can answer them. Well, I can try to answer them. I am not the best at wiring. I understand the basic concept of it. Some of it still eludes me. Did a lot of research when I was starting to wire this, or starting to plan the wiring for this model road, just to make sure I was getting the right gauge, the right material for best conductivity. If you hear a little sound in the background, it's my son's rocker. And he's asleep in it, so I am not going to move him. So if I can figure out how to get copyright-free music on these live streams and avoid the copyright claim, I will. But until then, provide your own music. Or sing in your head. Or don't listen to music at all. If you are so inclined. Normally I listen to podcasts. I am a podcast aficionado. Okay. So if you don't know how to attach wire to terminal blocks, let me show you real quick. This is 18 gauge. 18 gauge, is that correct? No, I'm sorry. This is 22 gauge solid wiring. This will be my feeders that go to my track. And so they're going to connect to this terminal. And I create a little hook. Focus. How well can this camera focus on something small? Not very well, apparently. Okay, so there's a little hook you can kind of see. Okay. And that hook is going to go kind of around the screw. So it kind of hooks around the base of that screw. If I do it right. And I do it I hook it so that when I turn the screw in a clockwise motion to tighten it down, okay, now it's kind of hooked around there. When I turn that screw into a clockwise motion, it won't pop that wire out. It'll tighten around the screw a little bit more. And hold really solid. Oh, we're split completely off. Yikes. That's not what I wanted. Failed already. What did I do? Let's try that again, shall we? Come on. Come on. There we go. Okay. Let me know if there's audio issues in this stream. I've got a microphone hooked up today. So hopefully, sounds good. Should sound better anyway. Okay, so wire hooked around. Let's try this again. Let's go ahead and tighten it down. Maybe not go so super tight this time. Let's see. There you go. Ta-da! Magic trick, I know. Oop, I think I'm getting to the end of my red. That's right, man. All right. It's starting to get a little low. With your feeders, you generally do not want to run them more than, I think, 12 inches is what they say. Otherwise, you start to lose current. This is more than 12 inches, but not much more. So that's why the bus is important, and also why it's important to keep an eye on where you're running your bus line and where you're running track, and make sure you've got that thicker bus line as close to all the points on your track you need to run feeders to as possible. And if any of this is not making sense, let me know and I can kind of clarify. If you're new to this, I know wiring is one of those sort of mystical things that are sometimes not well explained in the magazines. I only know what little I do know from kind of years of reading the magazines and then slowly sort of deducing some of what they were saying, and then being able to go back later on forums and take a look. Why is this being so? There's a different type of terminal strip that I didn't get, where you kind of like push the wire in. It's white. It's got these little things you push the wire in and screw it down that way. I couldn't find those cheap enough in these larger sizes, so that's why I went with this one. But I think this is probably a little more of a pain in the butt. But easier than soldering, which is something I avoid whenever I can. All right. How are we doing today? How is quarantine going for you? Hopefully well. I kind of thought that I would be spending a lot more time working on my model rail than I have been through quarantine. I've been working on some other hobby projects, but not model railroading. And I think it's because this is not only my layout room, but it's also my office for work. So I'm down here 8 hours a day, every day working. And the idea of getting off work and staying in this room for another hour or so, even that, to work on the layout is not super interesting to me at the moment. So I'm not doing it. If I can get all the wire and run off this. I only got one more of these and then I'm out. I have to buy some more. I was hoping to be able to do the whole layout with the wire I have on hand, but I don't know that that's going to happen. There's a lot more wiring going into this than I had previously expected. It's a little surprising, actually. Well, I don't know if it's surprising. I take a look at those guys with really large layouts. They have to do a lot of wiring. And I'm just really impressed. And I know some of those guys kind of have crews that help them out. I don't have that. I'm a one-man operation. Oop. That came free. That was not screwed on there well. I saw a really interesting interview with the owner-operator of the BNSF Fall River Division. Forgive me, I forget his name. But if you're not familiar with the Fall River Division, there's a few really good YouTube videos that kind of show off the layout and show off some of the operation on the layout. It's a very large sort of proto-freelance version of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Come on. Very large layout. One of those where the basement was designed around the layout kind of deals. And the amount of wiring in that thing is pretty impressive. But the guy's got a crew of people who come and help him out with it. Red's gone. So he's got a crew of people. I'm sure he's got a guy that is really good with wiring, and a guy that's really good at scenery, and so when you have that, you're in pretty awesome shape. His layout is really nice. It's very impressive. He's in Denver, and my brother lives in Denver. So I'm hoping to get out there one day and see it in person, because there are a few layouts in the country I want to see in person, and his is one of them. I also really want to see the Utah belt in person. I was planning on seeing it at this year's National Model Railroad Show, but that is not happening anymore, which stinks, but makes sense. Well, this isn't the most exciting live stream. I don't have a lot of trains running or scenery I'm working on. This is kind of the boring side to model railroading. But it is a very important side to model railroading. For sure. There's a lot of interest a number of years ago in dead rail model railroads. Dead rail being layouts where you don't need to wire up the rails. Everything is battery operated. And that is a very interesting concept. And it didn't really pick up, mostly because I don't think battery technology is quite there yet, although it's getting pretty good in some instances. But I don't know that we're going to see kind of consumer level batteries that are going to be able to do what we want to do in model railroading anytime soon. How do you get a battery small enough to fit in a locomotive that will be able to power it with the sound and the lighting and the motors and all that for a several-hour operating session? That's the tricky thing, is it's kind of got to work for a couple hours, right? My layout will, I believe, take about 2 hours to run a full operating session. And that some locomotives only run, for 5-10 minutes of that operating session, bringing cars on the layout, taking them off, that kind of thing. But my local switcher, my main workhorse from the Midland Falls Railroad, has to be working and operational for the entirety of that 2 hours. And battery technology just doesn't quite cut it yet to do something like that. And so here we are. Spending our Saturday wiring up some terminal blocks, some terminals. This one's not on here very well. There we go. If you are new to model railroading, hopefully you're making a layout that is small enough and simple enough that complex wiring isn't going to be an issue for you. I have seen layouts kind of die at the wiring phase. And I'll admit, for me, it is not a fun task all the time. This could be on here better. Oh, I'm out of black as well. Is that right? Yes. Out of black, out of red. So that means go get a couple more rolls. Be right back. Also means I need to do a little more ordering. How many feet of wiring is this? 25 feet per color. So far I have wired up, let me see, not a lot of this layout, and I ran out. So I need to buy probably twice again as much wiring as I have now in order to finish this layout. Well, twice as much as 22 gauge solid, black and red. I don't need anything, twice as much of anything else. So I will say this for DCC, wiring is very simple for it, considering kind of everything that you can do with DCC. It's not a lot to it. You got a red wire, you got a black wire. Make sure the black wire is on the right side of the track. The red wire is on the other side of the track. Turnouts nowadays are pretty straightforward. As far as how to wire those up as well. I have microengineering turnouts, so they have they're set up very well for DCC. The main thing is with turnouts is running a green wire. Green doesn't have to be green. Running a wire from your frog. I use green because frogs are green. That way you can power your frog if you need to. But even that is starting to not become an issue with things like capacitors within locomotives. Which is really awesome as well. So the only time wiring really becomes an issue is with DCC anyway, is when you start kind of doing complex things. For example, I have a hidden staging yard. I knew that was going to happen. I have a hidden staging yard, and that staging yard has hidden switches, which I will not be able to throw by hand, which means I need to power, have tortoises power those switches, those turnouts. Which means I have to control those tortoises, and I'm going to choose to do it with my DCC controller. For now, I think I'll switch over to a panel on the layout eventually, but I'm not going to wire up that panel right now. And trying to figure out how to wire all that has been kind of an interesting dilemma. Not dilemma. An interesting journey. Let's get a little bit of longer water on this one here. There are a number of really good videos on wiring, though. I highly recommend Model Railroad Video Plus's subscription service. If you go to modelrailroader.com, I think is the magazine's URL, take a look at their Model Railroad Video Plus series. They have a series of videos, like how-to videos on all sorts of subjects, including wiring. And I really highly recommend that. I'm a big fan. People give the magazine a lot of crap for being a little too focused on the beginner, a little too simple. And I hear you. I do. I have a subscription, but I tend to not read it these days because it's a lot of the same article over and over again, unfortunately. I hate to say that. I do like seeing some of the layouts from guys I know through the blogs and the forums and the YouTubes. I like to see their layouts in the magazine. I like reading about their layouts. But Their beginner information is very good. And their Model Railroad Video Plus service is excellent. There's a lot of really good information, a lot of very entertaining content for only a couple of bucks a month. And it's fun to see somebody work through the process of building a model railroad, which is kind of why I'm doing these YouTube videos. Okay, so I've got all my feeders wired up to this terminal block now, black and red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to connect wires that will eventually run from my model railroad, the bus line on my model railroad, to this terminal block. And there's a couple ways to do that. There is this method here. Well, there's a couple types of wire you can use to do this. This is the type of wiring I'm actually running as bus line on my model railroad. This is 12 gauge, I believe. Is it 12? I believe it's 12 gauge. Yeah, 12 gauge stranded solid copper wire. This is very nice stuff. It's also very expensive. It's very, very expensive. And I don't have a lot of it left. This is all the 12 gauge stranded wire that I have. So I'm saving this. This is bus line wire. I'm going to step down in size a little bit. This is 14 gauge stranded copper clad wire. And you can tell the difference when you take a look at wire between copper and copper clad. Let's see here. I don't know if this is going to be able to focus well enough. So here's copper wire. And essentially, if you look down the barrel of it, focus, 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 focus on the wire. Yeah, it won't do it. Sorry about the focus issue here. If you look down the barrel of the wire, it's copper straight down there. A lot of people will try to sell you copper clad wire as copper wire. Or even better, they'll sell it to you and they'll emphasize the copper part of the wire. But really what it is it's a copper coated. Is it steel? I don't know what the actual material that they actually end up using is in the wire, but it's not copper, which is not an issue. It's not a super big issue. Sorry about the focus issue. It's not a major problem on small layouts. If you have a small railroad where you're only running maybe 20 feet of wire of bus line, this stuff is fine. It's way cheaper than copper stranded wire. And nearly as electrical. The only problem is if you're running longer lines of this, you're going to start to see voltage drop over a longer line. So I don't use this for my bus lines. Instead, what I use this is kind of running when I want to run thicker wire off of the bus line a shorter distance. So this wire will actually go from my bus into these terminal blocks. And we'll take care of that now. If you go to the hardware store, you'll find nice copper wire. Let me make it a little bit longer just to be safe. Doesn't need to be that long, but it will be for this. Yeah, so you'll find nice copper wire if you go to the hardware store for cheaper, actually, I find, than trying to buy it online. I don't know why that is. Wiring is, for some reason, well, I've only really looked on eBay and Amazon, so I can't say if there's other places online that's cheaper. Come on. One mistake I did make was I bought 2 big rolls of 12 gauge solid copper wire. And your solid copper wire, you're going to have, it's going to be nice and conductive, but oh my gosh, was that stuff stiff. Very difficult to try to thread through the layout. So I ended up, I still got it, but I'm not using it on the layout. With your bus lines, you'll want to use for sure stranded wire. Stranded wire is really easy to bend. It's got good resistance from breakage. To your track, you want the solid wire because you're using very, very thin wiring and you're soldering and that kind of thing. So you're going to want the thin wire to the solid wire to track. But if you're using solid copper wire, see, so you can see this looks like copper wire because it is copper in color. Focus. Man, why am I having issues focusing today? Usually focuses better. Okay, here we go. Just get it real close, man. So it looks like copper wire, but if you take a look at the tip of it, it is in fact you see like the white metal is only clad in copper. So it's not quite as conductive as a solid copper wire would be. And so therefore you lose voltage over longer distances. Okay, so I'm going to use these, I think they're called pigtails. Forgive me, I'm not super familiar with all these terms. I'm going to use these pigtails to connect this to this, and actually that's too big, so we'll use these smaller ones. Because I want to be able to disconnect everything as much as possible. I have crimping tools. Let me grab that. Here is a tool that you might think you could live without, but you really can't. It's a crimper. What is it called? It's got some cool name. I think, but if you look up crimper on Amazon, you'll be able to find it. I'm actually going to look it up right now and tell you what it is. All right. Part of my reach here. Because, okay. It's called this one. So this one's $20 on Amazon, which is a decent price. The ratcheting wire terminal crimper tool. I thought it had a different name than that. I guess it's just called a wire crimper. This one has red, blue, and yellow on it, which we'll see here in a second why that's very cool and important. But these crimpers are really good for crimping this kind of stuff here. So if I do it right, so I've slid the wire into here, and I'm going to crimp it down. You can see when I do that, it kind of smashes everything together, and it makes for a nice, tight bond onto that. And that's awesome. The other side of this will be connected to my bus line, and I'm doing kind of something special with my bus lines. If you do a lot of searching well, not a lot, but if you start to take a look at like wiring layouts, you're going to see people talk about suitcase connectors. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. My son is awake. Come on. Okay, so you if you take a look at bus lines and wiring and motor roads, you're going to see people talking about suitcase connectors. Suitcase connectors are, I've used them in the past on past layouts. They will connect thin wire such as this that leads to your, that drops down from your track work, these feeder wires, to your bus line, which is going to be a thicker wire, right? Problem with suitcase connectors are they're kind of a one and done thing. Once you crimp the suitcase connector onto your wires, both are kind of permanently connected at that point. And trying to remove them is an issue. Another issue with suitcase connectors is they're not very flexible. You have a certain amount of wire, certain gauge of wire you can use on one end, and a certain gauge of wire you can use on the other end. And if there's too much of a disparity there, for example, if I'm using 12 gauge wire as my bus line and 22 gauge wire for my feeders, that is a pretty big difference between the two wires. And although you can take a suitcase connector and connect those two together, you're going to have compromises. If you get a suitcase connector that is a little too large, it may work really good on your 12 gauge wire, but it will be just on the edge of usable for your feeder wires, your very, very thin wires. And so you may run into instances where you crimp that suitcase connector down and you get a nice solid connection to your bus line, but your feeder wire is just barely penetrates the plastic on this, and you're barely getting a connection, or you're not getting a connection at all, and it just kind of like comes out. So then the opposite is, let's use a little bit of a smaller suitcase connector that works really good for the feeder line. Well, what happens there is you might get a nice solid connection on your feeder line because the suitcase connector is small enough that it can take care of that, but it's going to be too tight on your bus line. And so it's going to smash in there, and it's going to cut through the bus line and sever the connection possibly, so that anything further down on the bus line, there's no connection. Now, the reason why people use suitcase connectors to begin with is because they are, it's way easier than trying to solder feeder line to bus line, especially underneath a model railroad, climbing underneath there, and then trying to solder above your head. It's not safe. It's not fun. Nobody likes to do it, so you use suitcase connectors. A lot of people hate suitcase connectors because of the connectivity issues. I discovered these guys. These are Spade. What are they called? No, it's not even giving me a good name on them. They're by Horby. Let me actually take a look on my Amazon purchase history. See if I can figure out what they are. They're called Horley 240 piece. They're T-tap wire terminals, quick splice electrical connectors. I think T-tap wire terminals is what you're going to look for. And what's cool is these are separate pieces that are sized differently. There's a large, there's a small, and there's kind of a medium connection. White, blue, and red. And so I can use a large connection here on my bus line, and I can use a small connection on my feeders. And what happens is I connect this to my bus, I connect this to my feeder. These are really nice solid connections to both. And then I can connect these two together so that I get a really solid connection between the bus and the feeder. And I'm using connection points that are appropriately sized for the type of wire that goes in there. I'm not compromising at all by getting something a little too small for one or a little too large for another. Another great thing about these are you can disconnect these from each other. So once you connect it up to each other, you get a solid connection, but that connection can then be disconnected and removed to diagnose a problem, replace some wiring. You don't run into this issue where, if you have to replace, like, say, a turnout, or if you're moving around track or something, and you need to disconnect from a suitcase connector, you can't reconnect at that point. You have to either solder in the line together above the connector, or leave it and create another connection further on down the bus line. This you can disconnect, reconnect, do whatever you need to. So I'm doing a couple things in my model railroad that, for example, I am wiring up my staging tracks right now. It's kind of one big block. Eventually I'm going to go back and separate that into 3 separate blocks. I'm not doing it yet, but I have that plan in the future. With these types of connections, I can connect things up now, get it running now, and then later on down the road, disconnect those and make the connections that I want to make when I go to kind of separate each track in my staging yard into its own separate block that I can control individually. So that's cool. So all that's to say, these guys right here, Horley T-tap wire terminals are awesome and the way to go. And if you buy them on Amazon right now, they are currently unavailable. Yikes. Oh, here we go. You can find something similar. Oh, that's not bad. So the set that I bought is no longer available. You can find something very similar. Nylite 120 piece, so there's 60 pairs. 120 piece for $8. It's actually a very good price. This was, I think, $17 when I bought it. All right. So this side will be connected into here. This side's going into my bus line, so I'm going to go ahead and connect this up here like this. And the way I do it is slide it right in, and then I slide it through so I can start to see the wire kind of poking out the top. See how the wire's kind of poking out of the top onto the spade itself. That way I know I've got enough of the wire down in there. And then I grab my wire crimpers. And what's cool is they've got this yellow, blue, and red on the crimper. So I know match yellow with yellow, and I'm going to get a good crimp. Make sure my wire's in there good and solid, and crimp it down. And there we go. Good and solid and on there. Okay. And we're going to stick that in there. I'm going to do a little more work on this before I call that good. But let's go ahead and get the red set up as well. And actually, let me trim this a little shorter. It's a little too much. Hey, South Berkeley Railroad. What about Wago connectors? How are they used? I'm going to look that up real quick because some of this terminology, I've probably seen it before. Yeah. So if I remember correctly, I have not used those before. I've seen them used. And I believe, if I've got this right, you've got, it looks like a terminal much like this. But instead of each one of these blocks being individually kind of separated from each other, everything on the terminal gets powered the same. So if I plug in a positive, everything else here is going to be positive. And actually, you don't have a backside; you just have a front side. So if I plug one wire into here, everything that comes out of this front side is going to also be positive as well. I don't believe you can separate them. So what's cool about those are they're even easier than this because you don't need these sort of spade connections here in order to connect everything up. It's just basically strip the wire, stick it in, press the top down on it. I believe that's how that works. Now, I have not used them myself. They look really good. They look really cool. The price seems a little expensive for what you're getting. So I'm looking at like a, what is this here? Well, you know what? I bet if you, I don't think it's actually that bad, depending on where you go. That would also be a really good way to go. How am I powering my layout? I have a NCE cab control system. It is it is one of the newer systems on the market. And it is, I like it a lot. It is very simple to use. The interface is very nice on it. That's what I really like. I'm not a big fan of the interface on either NCE or Digitrax DCC systems. Doing things like setting up CVs, creating consists, that kind of thing can be a little tricky on those systems. They're not as nice. So a lot of people end up well, I had an NCE system, DCC system before, which is a great beginner system, but if you're just going to start to do more with it, it becomes a little tricky, especially if you're going to like start powering accessories, switches, stuff with it. The more stuff you add to it, the trickier it gets. Those systems have been around for a very long time, so there's a lot of people who know them, and documentation is really great on it. So I wouldn't let the fact that they're a little esoteric in their interface kind of dissuade you from using them. Why did I do that? I didn't mean to do that. I just wasn't thinking. But yeah, so I use the NCE system. What's cool about it is it's a Wi-Fi controlled system as well. So I don't need to use their controller on it at all. I can use an app on my phone. Not that I would, but I can. I can use, there's another one that just came out on the market by, I can't remember the name of the company. It's Wi-Fi throttle. Oh, I can't remember the name of the company. So there are options that you can use that aren't, you're not like stuck into their ecosystem. The bad thing about it is I really like their throttles, but on the current generation, and I think they've actually fixed this, but on the current generation, the throttles are kind of terrible as far as Wi-Fi connection goes. So the whole system works on the Wi-Fi, right? Just like your phone connects to your Wi-Fi network at home, these throttles connect to the Wi-Fi connection of your base. And that Wi-Fi connection is really bad. I don't know why they compromised in the way they did on the throttles themselves, but I think they have fixed it in the newer versions, which kind of stinks because mine is only a couple of years old. But there's an easy fix for you to do on your own. Because it is Wi-Fi, you can use basically any Wi-Fi router or booster. ESU. ESU is the name of the company that owns the ESU cab control system. So ESU also owns Lokesound decoders. I have these guys here. These guys will connect up. We'll get to that in a second. But anyways, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So let's see. How do I want to do this? Yeah, let's do it that way. Yeah. So ESU, the throttles are connect to the base station via Wi-Fi, and the throttles are really, really terrible, and the base station's signal is really bad. And I have a baby monitor in my bedroom upstairs, which is kind of right above the layout, and that baby monitor also runs on the same frequencies that my Wi-Fi does, and so it really messes with my ESU cab control base station throttles. I lose connection while standing right next to the base station, which is bad. But the fix is simple. And the fix is just get a booster or a Wi-Fi router, or, so you can get a booster on Amazon for like $40, probably even a little less, that will boost the signal of the Wi-Fi coming from the cab control system. So you can take that booster, stick it kind of like on the other side of the room, or maybe even in the middle of the room, and boost the signal coming from that, and that fixes the issue of the router dropping out. The throttle dropping out. I put a Wi-Fi router on mine, gave it its own network name and everything, just in case I want to do some stuff in the future with JMRI or some other thing. So you can just connect right to that. So I sort of replaced the Wi-Fi of the cab control base station itself with the Wi-Fi. I'm using now the Wi-Fi of the router. It sounds more complicated than it is, but the router's much nicer, and so my connection issues go away. What do I think about Proto Throttle? I almost bought one a couple months ago. I almost bought a Proto Throttle. I will eventually have one. I don't know enough of, from what I understand with the Proto Throttle, it's really great, but it does require you to do a little bit of work on your end, setting up the Proto Throttle for your individual locomotives. It kind of has the same issue that I have with that I also have with Digitrax or some of the other DC systems out there where it's a little trickier to mess with. So I have not bought one yet because I kind of I have to get better at DCC myself. I am not. I don't know much about it. All I've ever really done with DCC, to be honest, is, I plug in the locomotive as it comes from the manufacturer, and I run it as is. And I may turn the volume down, but that's about it. So I need to kind of really learn how to program a DCC decoder before I kind of really can appreciate what Protothrottle is doing for me. So I have not bought one yet, but it is in the future. I do absolutely plan on getting one. And I kind of am hoping that, what am I doing here? I kind of am hoping that they come out with a new version of the Protothrottle before I end up pulling the trigger and buying mine. Because right now on the Protothrottle, and they may have changed it, but I don't think they have yet. But right now, in order to change, oh, wait, what am I doing? Oh, this is not even the right size. No, poop. I was hoping to use these guys so I could save myself some trouble. Nuts. Let me show you what I was trying to do. So I'm trying to take this wire, run it into here, and then over, boop, 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 jump along here, jumping, so that I can connect all that stuff together. And so use this guy to make those jumps for me. But look at it. These came with these, which are much bigger and fit perfectly. So I'm just going to have to wire up some more of these, I guess. That's going to be the best way to do it, I think. That's going to be the best way to do it. Oh, man. Oh, well. So the Protothrottle, yeah. The other thing I'm hoping that they do with the Protothrottle is I hope, one, it comes down in price a little bit. That's going to be too short. I do think it's a little expensive for what it is. I think it's appropriately priced for what it takes to make one, if that makes sense. They're a small company. It's kind of a niche market. I don't know that's over. I don't think it's overpriced, but I think it could be cheaper. I don't have a problem paying the price that it costs, knowing what went into its development and its positioning in the market. That being said, if you take a look at, say, one thing I've been getting into lately is the I fly RC airplanes as well, off and on, or I've done it for a while over the years, and I'm starting to get into the RC car world as well. And if you take a look at the price of the controllers, you can get a very nice aircraft or surface controller for what they're charging on the Protothrottle. Now, the Protothrottle is kind of like the Cadillac of the monobarrel throttle world. It is kind of like the nice throttle, but what goes into it is mechanically interesting, but isn't. What am I trying to say? I think once they kind of prove themselves in the market and more people buy them, which they should, because I think it's super awesome, I think that the price will get a little more reasonable at that time. Oh, this is just a long way of saying that I want one. And that I will have one day myself. It seems to be appropriate for the type of mono railroad that I'm putting together. I'm mad at myself that I did that. Didn't pay close enough attention. Yeah, the proto throttle seems appropriate for the kind of mono railroad that I am putting together, which is a small switching layout where the majority of what you're doing is kind of moving cars around yards or between industries. And what I'm going for with this mono railroad is operational interest and scale, a scale feeling, a very realistic, sort of engrossing sort of sensibility. So if you take a look at some of the guys that have them already, Seaboard Central, the Iowa, what's his name? What is his name? He does the Iowa Railroad. The guy who does the Georgia, what's it called? My brain is not working today. The big YouTubers who have sung the praises of the proto throttle. I have a similar sort of philosophy to railroading that they do. So it seems very appropriate for my layout, where most of the switching is focused around one locomotive doing some simple but interesting switching maneuvers. Just gotta get the price down. And I gotta learn a little bit more about DCC. I want to, whenever I do buy it, really be able to appreciate what it's doing for me. Oh, this isn't going to be the prettiest looking terminal, but it's going to work. I'm mad at myself for doing that. Man. Oh well. But yeah, if you're looking for a DCC system, I would encourage you to take a look at the ESU cab control system. It feels like a nice modern refresh of what a DCC system should be. Whereas NCE's system and Digitrax system kind of feels like hasn't really changed from when I was a teenager. And I'm not a teenager any longer. Now, that's not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, it means that it works. In that, it's been around long enough that people know how to use it. There's lots of documentation out there on it. There's lots of YouTube how-to videos. But okay. That's that. And then finally, that goes to there. Ugh, that is not pretty. But it's not pretty, but it'll work. Let's go ahead and lock everything down. Yeah, dude, I'm going to check out that interview. I'm really interested in it. I watched a ton of YouTube videos on it a few months back, just trying to get a sense of it. I think it's great. I think it's a great product. I really want one really bad. Okay, that's an ugly terminal block, but it'll do what it's supposed to do. So this wire comes off the bus into here and passes into each one of these guys here, and then shoots out to these feeders, which go out to the layout. Just like that. So now I'm going to do the red. Yeah. Yeah, I will check out that interview for sure. I really love the I love what it does to model railroading in that it makes. So one thing I've got like a lot of hobby interests. One thing I was into for a while, a number of months back, was sim racing. So where you, I was playing on the PlayStation 4, but most people play on the computer. Racing, you know, video game racing. But you know, you have a steering wheel, you have pedals, you have shifters, and there's the whole hobby community for sim racing really focuses on the most authentic experience possible. So not only do you have a steering wheel, right, but you have a steering wheel that delivers what's called force feedback, which is vibrations from the road. And there are a number of companies who produce steering wheels, and those companies produce, you know, the different steering wheels deliver different amounts of force feedback. They deliver that force feedback using different mechanical means to do so. Some use gears, some use belts, some are what's called direct drive, which is a direct connection to a motor. And they all have their advantages and disadvantages, mostly in cost and fidelity of the force feedback. Shifters are built in such a way to give like a really nice mechanical clunk. Some are better than others at delivering that sort of very mechanical feeling. And the whole community is really focused on like, how do we take the real world simulation, real world driving experience and simulate it as closely as possible while you're sitting in your basement on your computer. And I'm a guy who really likes kind of like weird engineering feats and stuff anyway. So like the technology that goes into building that simulated experience is really fascinating. So to extend that into model railroading in the way that Iowa Scale Engineering is doing to create an experience of the mechanical experience of pulling levers and notching a locomotive up and down and stuff is very cool. But then also how that translates to what you're seeing on the layout as well is very cool. I'm very interested in it. But like I said, I don't know enough about DCC. Also, I don't know enough about locomotives. That is one aspect of the hobby that, come on, why is this not coming off? There we go. That I need to do a little more work to learn about. I got my favorite locomotives, mostly based on what they look like. I know there's people out there that can speak forever about very specific details of locomotives, and I'm not one of those guys. But it's one of those aspects of the hobby that you can always pick up later. I'm tossing that, redoing it. That's not good. When in doubt, toss it out. Yeah, that rumble, that inertia, the locomotive when you notch it up and down. And I'm going to start using ESU loc sound decoders in all of my locomotives, and they've got some features on there that work really well with the proto throttle. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I want one. It's just, I also need an airbrush. It's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to be spending the money, I almost bought one, but instead I bought 2 scale trains locomotives, and I don't regret buying those because I needed them. I needed them on a layout in order to be able to run an operating session with the correct number of locomotives. So it's something I needed. Whereas the proto throttle is more of a want. I need an airbrush and a compressor. In the past, I've been able to get away with rattle can spray paint, but I'm just not going to be able to do that anymore. I've got way too much track to paint, way too much rail to paint to get away with a spray can of paint. I did all my old track with Rust-Oleum's brown camouflage spray paint, and that was fine. Did not have an issue. But I had very little amount of track. I had about 10 feet of track I had to paint. Well, a little more than that, but I have 20 times that now, 20 times that amount of track to paint. I'm not going to be able to get away with that. The smell of spray paint wafting through the house will put me in the doghouse for years. South Brooklyn, do you work on the real world railroad? Or are you just a fan? You sound like a guy who knows the taste of diesel smoke. Ah, see, I can tell. I was talking to my wife about this. You find a lot of model railroaders did the real world railroading as their job, and I don't know of many other careers where the hobby is like what they did for a living. And it's funny that happens with trains. So I was an animation major in college, and I love animation. And I thought this was great. Like I can get a job as an animator, and in my spare time, I can create my own animations, and I can just live the life of an animator. And once I got a job as an animator, the last thing I wanted to do at the end of the day was more animation. And it's just interesting to me that like something about trains. I see that with truck driving too, actually. There's truck drivers who love to play truck sim games on the computer where they got, again, the steering wheel, the pedals, the shifter, and they sit there on the weekends when they're done driving trucks for the week, and they drive virtual trucks on the computer. And I just think that's so funny. It's so interesting that for some reason trains, like the draw of trains, like you can't get away from it. I don't know what it is. I think there's something. I mean, obviously there's something about railroads and trains, right? Otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. I wouldn't be doing this, but there's something about it. That's just fascinating and like endlessly, like you just don't get enough. There's a quality to it that is intangible, I think, a little bit. That's great. I mean, it's great when you find something that you love so much that you want to, you can't get enough of it, even when you're retired, right? Okay. Well, this did not turn out the way I was expecting it to, but it's going to work. Let me just tighten all my screws down. Ugh, this is not the one thing, like I hate wiring, but the one thing that makes it tolerable is the fact that I can make it kind of clean and pretty. And you look at it and you're like, oh, wow, that looks really nice. Like that's the one thing about wiring that at the end of it, I'm like, oh, that looks really nice. This looks not nice. I don't know. It doesn't look bad on camera, I guess. This one really long wire here is a little annoying to me. You know what? Screw it. Let's fix it. I've got plenty of wires. I got plenty of connectors. Let's fix that one. That one that's too long, we're gonna make it shorter. This if I can impart any bit of wisdom to anybody, which I don't know if wisdom is necessarily what I have to offer, but don't be afraid to go back and redo something. If you're not happy with it, there's an easy solution. Let me make this a little bit longer, and let's just do it again. some of the mistakes I see. I don't know if mistake is a harsh word. Some of the times when people are unhappy with their layout, it's because they made a mistake or they did something that they hadn't tried before. They did it for the first time, and the results weren't great. And then they just didn't go back and fix it. They're like, well, I guess I could do better next time, right? But they didn't go back and fix it. And there's nothing that you can't go back and fix in model railroading, except for maybe a really bad paint job on a locomotive. Everything is fixable, and everything's worth doing right. And I'm just OCD enough that if it doesn't look great, it annoys me to no end. It looks good enough. You're right. It does look good enough. It is good enough, but sometimes good enough just isn't enough for me. I use these spade connectors on my stranded wire because I don't know if you've ever tried to just kind of wrap stranded wire around a screw and screw it down, but you start like it splits the wire, it cuts it off. It just, it's not good to do that. So that's why I'm using these little connectors and then doing it that way there. I think if I was to do it again, I would try to find a better way to connect wires to these terminals. I didn't require the little spade. Am I using the right term? Spade connectors? I'm probably not using the right term. All right. 2 wires run to the bus line. I probably made them too long, but whatever. And then terminal, which runs 5 feeders for positive, 5 feeders for negative. And what this is going to allow me to do is, like, all these connections that would have normally gone to the bus line all get turned into just 2 connections to the bus line. So that is going to help me prevent possible electrical issues on the bus line itself. The one point of the layout where you cannot afford to have electrical issues really is going to be on the bus line, because if you sever that bus line all down the whole layout, you're going to have issues. Even if you cut it a little bit and you get like intermittent connectivity issues, everything downstream of your power pack is going to have intermittent connectivity issues. So I try to minimize everything coming out of that bus line. That's why we have this terminal block here. That's why we do that. Yeah, spade connectors. Thanks, South Brooklyn. I want to make sure I had it right. Sometimes I hear words or I see words written down, and then I don't put 2 and 2 together. Cool. So I have been going for 1 hour and 35 minutes, which is long enough, I think, for what I want. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do one other thing. Do I want to do it? Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and wire up some more feeders that's going to go directly to the to the bus line. So they would be feeders that drop from the track to the bus line. Sounds pretty simple. But what I'm going to do is I have a 3-track staging yard. So I'm going to have, so all this right here is going to be all the turnouts that lead into the staging yard. Okay. And some of the track that kind of like bridges those turnouts. So that's what this is. The track within the staging yard itself is, so I have a 3-track staging yard. So the flex track that makes up that track there also needs powered. I want to run a feeder to every piece of track. But I don't want to have so many connections to the bus line itself. So what I'm going to do is this will be connected to the little guy that goes into the bus line, much as in the same way this is connected into the bus line. Well, I'm going to run 3 feeder wires from this single connection. So 1 connection to the bus line, 3 feeder wires. Let's see here. I'll show you how to do that real quick. So, I'm not going to do it across. We'll do 1, and then we'll call it the end of a stream. Okay. So we got 3 wires there. Let's go ahead and strip them. And again, these are, I'm using 22 gauge solid copper wire. Or no, it's not copper. What is it? Nickel silver? I can't remember what it's called. I want to make sure I have a really secure connection because this wire is so small and these connectors only go down so small. The wire is very, very thin and it goes into an opening that is much wider than the wire itself is. Four other live shows going on at the same time as me. Oh my gosh, South Brooklyn. Saturday mornings is popular time for model railroading, I guess. So if I'm just going 1 wire into one of these guys, I'm going to fold that wire over, double up on itself, so we get a little bit of like a loop in this little type, and then push that in there. So essentially, there's much more wire making the connection inside here. You can't really do any soldering when you get in here because of the plastic shroud that surrounds it. So there's no way to sort of really secure the connection just by the 1 tiny wire going into here. So by looping it over itself, sliding it in there, you get enough wire to make that connection. Here I am, I'm making a connection with 3 wires though. So these 3 wires themselves will be enough in order to make that enough of a connection. I'm just going to wrap them around themselves. 4 other live shows on a Saturday morning. Well, I mean, Saturday morning is the time to do it. I would do it on Sundays, but a lot of people have church and will be able to join me. I don't go to church, but a number of people would. So Saturday morning seems to be the best time for me to do it. I would do it like on a Saturday night, but the wife, that's kind of her time. Okay, so I wrap these 3 wires around themselves, and then I can slide them right in, and they go in nice and tight. And then I crimp it down like that. Boom. Now we have 1 connection to the bus line and 3 connections to each of the 3 yard tracks on my model railroad. I'm going to do that one more time with my black wire, just so I have that out of the way. And then we're going to call it. All right. I'm going to measure this out so I get about the same length of wire. My bus lines are running right below my track work, so I don't need to run. Actually, I probably need more than that, don't I? Yeah, this is enough. Try not to waste wire, so I try not to go hog wild with the length of my feeders. And I'm going to be putting together a tutorial video on all this. I've got the track work video to do first. So I've got plans. Yep, I'll see you Monday. Thanks for stopping in. Aw. Well, doing these YouTube live streams is inspiring me to work on my layout. I am a lazy person. I can easily find excuses not to work on wiring. But giving myself a show, a weekly thing I need to do. It gives me that little bit of not inspiration, a little bit of responsibility. What is the word? I don't know. Anyway, there we go. So those are ready. These are ready. Got a lot of feeders ready to go in the layout. And that will end today's stream. Thank you, everyone, for stopping by. I appreciate it. Yeah, I will be doing these live streams every Saturday starting at 9 a.m. Central. I'm going to actually take a look at other shows and see who else is streaming at this time, and maybe even work my stream around theirs so that, like, hey, this guy's show's finishing, so if people are looking to continue watching something, maybe they switch over to my stream. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But really good progress. I mean, for an hour and 43 minutes to be able to get all this wiring sort of ready to go, I think that's not bad, especially for me. Anyways, yeah. Thanks so much. I appreciate you all for stopping in, and I will see everyone very, very soon. Actually, I'm going to be doing a live show with South Brooklyn and a couple other people on Wednesday. So I'm going to find out some more details, and I'll get a video out letting everyone know when that's going to happen. And so you guys can check that out as soon as that goes live. And I'm really excited and looking forward to that. Looking forward to talking about model railroading then. Thank you, South Brooklyn. Thank you, everyone. And I will see everyone in the next one.